Hey, this is Alex. Quick sidebar. If you're looking for more ways to fill your well, sign up for the EduWell newsletter. Once a month, you'll get one Be Well drop, one Do Well drop, and a book recommendation from us. Just go to the EduWell website and sign up today.
Today, we're joined by Anthony Carabache. Anthony is a staff officer in professional development with the Ontario English Catholic Teachers Association, a member of the Information and Privacy Commissioner of Ontario's Strategic Advisory Council, and a designer, author, and strategist in educational technology. Anthony has worked on AI policy and has been a part of important conversations around privacy, equity, and governance. He helps teachers make sense of both the opportunities and the challenges AI brings to teaching and learning. Today, he's here to help us break down what we really need to know about AI as teachers. Let's dive into the well.
Welcome to the EduWell podcast, a show created for, by, and with teachers. I'm Alex.
And I'm Chelsea. Our goal is to share insights and connect with fellow teachers on how to thrive both personally and professionally.
Join us as we dive deep into the well of information filled with relatable tips, practical discussions, and ideas that go way beyond the classroom walls. Let's be well
and do well together. Anthony, welcome to the show. We have been looking forward to this conversation for a while now. So thank you for being here.
Oh, totally my pleasure, Chelsea. And thank you for that introduction. It was amazing, beautiful. And I've been waiting to get on the show for a long time. So let's dive in whenever you're ready.
I'm ready to dive into. I cannot wait to hear what you have to say about this topic and how we can use that in our classrooms to make sure that we're doing this in a responsible way.
Okay, so Anthony, you started out in ed tech as a resource teacher with the Toronto Catholic School Board. So to start, can you walk us through that journey and maybe tell us how your role has evolved along the way?
Right. So that's a long time ago. So it was in 2008. So I had been teaching for close to 8 years in the classroom, in the intermediate classroom. And an opportunity came up to become a resource teacher for integration of technology. And at the time, I was blogging with my grade 7s. And of course, Facebook was the Facebook at the time. It was a brand new thing. And I was just a couple of weeks into the school year. I noticed a few things that were happening in terms of messaging online on the Facebook. And I reported it to our principal at the time and said, hey, there were rival gangs, and they were dragging some of my students into this rivalry. And they were planning a really big confrontation at the mall, at the Scarborough Town Centre at the time. And so we notified Toronto Police at the time, and Toronto Police then asked me to help them conduct an investigation using this new technology, this thing called the Facebook. It wasn't known as social media at the time. And then they were able to arrive in time to disperse any of the things that would have happened. So that was really cool. And then CP24 got wind of it. So I was interviewed in Toronto's news and media. And I thought, okay, maybe I do have some understanding of what's going on. And this really started to intrigue me about how students and humans in general were engaging with technology, and to use it for good as well. So that's how it started. I applied for that position and I got it. I couldn't believe I got it. The last words I said to the interviewer when I left the room were, the only thing we can be certain of is change, and I can help us through that. And he told me later that was the single reason why he gave me the position. And away we went. So from that point on, I would deliver workshops across the city of Toronto, trying to bring teachers into an understanding of how to integrate useful tools in the classroom. This was before Twitter was even launched. We were looking at tools like Blogger. We were building websites like Dreamweaver. And I was a big believer that tech could make a difference. And that was my hope.
We're so glad that you earned that opportunity, and we know that you've run with it because the story doesn't stop there in what you've accomplished in your career. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that the Facebook and what issues that caused, you said rival gangs, and that could have ended up really serious. I would suggest that Chelsea and I now over the past 8 to 10 years have experienced the negative consequences of social media into our classroom communities, into the school community, into the well-being of our students. And I would suggest that policy has not caught up to protect everyone from the social media. But when I think of Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat now, I think it's almost Mickey Mouse in comparison to what is now coming our way. And I also think that, again, we still don't have the policy to protect those pieces. So that is why this issue is such a, timely, pertinent, imperative issue to talk about as teachers.
100%. I couldn't agree with you more.
It is. And that's a huge reason why we need to understand this technology, right? So let's start by talking about some of the key concepts regarding AI. For instance, when I was in your workshop, you had asked us if we knew what LLM stood for, and I had no idea. And I actually asked my family this last night, asked everyone in my family.
Yeah.
No one knew. And,
Right.
I was like, well, it's large language model, guys. So there you go. So can you explain what these huge monsters are all about and what's happening behind, chatbots like ChatGPT and
Sure. So we know that it was in the early 2000s that we started to really engage with technology because of things like the iPhone and smaller and more powerful devices. But it really wasn't until the evolution of the App Store that changed the way humans engage with technology. So all of a sudden, you could just download this little program at no cost. Most of the times, you would just give up your first name, your last name, maybe your email address if it was a Hotmail at the time or Live, and so we would exchange our information for a service or for a game that we could like fling some Angry Birds across the screen. So all that information really was freely given, and the companies started to collect this data, but they couldn't really do anything with it. And so we got very information rich, but they couldn't draw any conclusions from that data at all. And really, it wasn't until the 2010s, like the early 2010s through 2013, that the chips became more and more powerful, and then they could process the data and draw a picture about the user. They could now say, hey, Alex has downloaded Angry Birds 3 or 4 times. Every update, she's on the app, and she's written a review. She's clearly likes this. So what else can we learn about Alex? So that's the beginning of the algorithm. The algorithm is the formula that answers the question, what else can we know? In other words, if Alex pushes this, or if her eyes rest on the screen for this long, then we can draw this conclusion that, for example, she was shopping for a barbecue or shoes that day. Because we say language is a large language learning model, this is a very complex algorithm that takes the language of the world, which is predominantly English because the West dominates the internet, which creates a huge equity issue around the world, and train it. And so what it does is it looks at the word of a sentence and it guesses what word will come next. And it uses examples from all over the world in hundreds of thousands of contexts. And those examples, just so you know, are called tokens. That's just a fancy word for it's just a check. So the algorithm will say, I'm going to check if the next word is going to be, car. And it will just run 1,000 tests in the blink of an eye to see if the next word you're going to say is car. And that's how we got here. The problem with that, and I guess we'll get into it after, is now it's not like they were using all that data for benevolence. They were using all of that data to predict what the user was going to do next. And the manner in which they're using that data is manipulative, right? It's not Yes, we hear all the other pieces, but that's how the large language learning model came to be. It's a huge prediction machine. And I'll finish by saying its core purpose is to use predictions to generate profit. Period. Does that help?
Yeah,
Okay.
I feel like we need to insert crickets because I don't know, like the cricket sound effect right now because my mind just went poop.
I was gonna
Poof.
say insert mind blown emoji.
Exactly. Yes. So, I mean, what I kind of the way I'm seeing this is somewhat of it went from making inferences about us as human beings. And now what I think we're moving in towards is it's literally in our heads asking us questions as we're training it. It is asking us direct questions, and we are at risk of giving our innermost thoughts and personal opinions to it. It's just it's going into such a more intense and possibly consequential stage.
100%.
Yeah, it sounds like the psychics are going to be out of a job here if this keeps progressing. Not cool.
Totally.
So would you say that this is invasive technology then?
Right. So is this invasive? This is the most insidious, invasive technology on the planet by design, Chelsea, by design.
So for teachers in the classroom, I mean, how can we distinguish between invasive and non-invasive technology specifically? Because we're always presented with things we can use in the classroom. I know that they are vetted, but what do we need to know about invasive and non-invasive?
So teachers are in the most unique position in society. I think they hold more responsibility than any other profession on the planet. And it isn't fair for them to be the thin blue line between this invasive and insidious entity and the protection and safety of those that we are to care for and educate. But what I say to audiences around the provinces, if we don't do it, who will? And so, whether you're a unionized teaching professional or not, there is power in unity. And the most important factor here is regulation. And because there is no regulation, we depend on what we perceive as expertise. And I'm here to tell everybody there are no experts. And if you listen and read and research carefully the words that the so-called leadership structures of these companies use and how they speak about safety, safety is not a priority for them. I would be very leery of anyone presenting a tool for educational use who says it's vetted or safe. It's simply untrue. It's simply untrue, right? Now, there are legal ramifications around that we could talk about another time, but when the leader or the CEO of a major AI company, Sam Altman is the example I'm using, he's the CEO of OpenAI. And OpenAI, of course, develops ChatGPT. When he says, we don't know how it's coming to its own decisions, and when he says, we release it first, then see what happens, we as teachers have to get our backs up a little bit and recognize that why are we the gateway to experimentation for big tech, right? And so back to your point around teaching and this idea of permitting it into our classroom, I'm not a technophobe, as I hope I've proven. I'm also not a doomer, but what the messages around my talks are, we shouldn't accept what we're given just because some tech bro is saying that this is the way to go. We should demand more. We should demand a safe and ethical use. And my friends, right now, doesn't exist. It is not a real thing in the world, right? and ChatGPT being the worst offender in terms of ethics, in terms of morality, in terms of harm out of all of the big four. Well, Grok is up there, right? So XAI or whatever you want to call it. It's pretty offensive as well.
I'm picturing moments in my classroom where I have, with my own, inspiration, come up with an idea that's going to be really beautiful. And I want the students to brainstorm their own ideas about how it's going to look, and project-based learning. To have that beautiful teachable moment be stifled and stagnated by a one quick lookup where the ideas are all there, and it's devoid of conversation, it's devoid of aha moments, it's devoid of spark, and it's done. And my experience that I've presented to my class is over in 2 seconds. And the students have offloaded their thinking to a machine and do not value their own beautiful thoughts and process. And that in itself, as a teacher, has given me massive amounts of pause as to the usage of this in any form. And I am not a Luddite, okay? Just for the record, I like technology too. I think we've hit a tipping point, though, where the quality of life that technology has offered us, the convenience, the information that we can look up, the harm for me has become greater than the benefit. And I, as a teacher, but I just as a human on earth, as a parent, as someone who cares about future generations, I look at this with a major critical lens because I see it happen within just live action. I see what it can do and how we devalue our own thinking. So that's a thing. That's an issue. That's a on the job learning experience for me.
It's a huge issue, Alex. I'm so glad you hit on those points, especially the cognitive offloading, and what you've observed is a really hot research topic right now. And we as adults, we have lived experiences and we have had learning. The article that I wrote, Friction is Where Learning Happens, is really an example of how the brain acquires information through struggle. That's the definition of learning. And there are some great researchers right now. The researcher that I was working with and will be continuing to work with this year is out of Western University, Dr. Jacqueline Burkell, who is the vice president of research at Western. She's doing work with her team. And the question they want to answer is, what happens to the brain when you give an assignment to students and they reach for an AI chatbot? And the research that has been released is very clear. There is a huge cognitive offload, and the data set shows when a student, and these are students of 19 years, and when they reach for the AI, their brain, the neurons aren't firing, right? And what they're producing is, she coined a phrase, it's a generative monoculture. It's a bland, characterless thought process, and the result looks that way. They produce gray writing. Those are my terms. They produce gray writing. And so I'm so happy that you have observed that. And I am like, my hope is that you would continue to share this message, because we're teachers. Our role is just not to impart knowledge. Our role is to teach students how to cope with struggle in acquisition of knowledge. That's the key here.
Exactly. And that creates resilience too. You mentioned
Exactly.
how the brain acquires through struggle, and then you have a pattern in your life that you can look back to and be like, I could not figure this out, and I had to really work with my friends to figure out how to solve this problem, and we did it. And you build that evidence that you can through those processes, right? So
well, it's growth mindset. Like, we don't want to lose that whole concept. That's how you get a growth mindset, by working through your struggles and by figuring things out and by learning. And if you don't have to do that, then you're just back to being a fixed mindset.
100%.
So let's move into using AI in the classroom. I know that we've pretty much touched on what to consider when using AI ourselves or being in the classroom, but in thinking about planning, assessing, and our core responsibilities, like, what are some things that we should really keep in mind? What's a message you have for us, Anthony?
The message for me is pretty clear. And it depends on the jurisdiction you're in around the world, but in most places around the world, teachers are regulated in one form or another. And that regulator, to my knowledge and to the research I've done to date, requires that it is a human being who delivers and who assesses. In the jurisdiction that we're in Ontario, for example, you must be a member of the College of Teachers. So if you can believe it or not, uh, we had to ask our legal team to confirm that the word member was synonymous with the word human. And what in my research globally, I had to bring all of our contracts, every global contract I could find that dealt with artificial intelligence. And you can imagine there weren't that many because it's still growing, right? But there were enough to know that the word human was now appearing in a lot of the contracts, which is really phenomenal. And so if we look at our duties here, I could look at our duties because Ontario is the easiest example, but I would imagine it's everywhere. Our duties are stipulated in a regulation or in law. In our case, it's called the Education Act. And our duties are pretty clear that all teachers are responsible for planning and delivery of content, but also for assessment. So when a teacher uses artificial intelligence, one that is geared for profit, one that does not see the students in the classroom, that has no interest, no benevolence programmed within, to create lessons or assessments, it's a real problem. Because truly, those are the core duties, those are the core actions that make us teachers. And so I understand when convenience plays a role. I understand that we are all overworked and that this presents a solution in terms of time saving, but this is not the right solution. The right solution is investment. The right solution is provision of time. The right solution revolves around valuing the teachers of society, right? In some countries, teachers are very highly valued, and in other countries, they are not. So we're solving the problem using the wrong tool. And that's a huge concern. And really, if a teacher who has 2 degrees, minimally where we are, teachers need 2 degrees, right? 5 or 6 years, depending on when they went to school. Now imagine that you can replace all of that with a prompt. So where does that leave us as humans? And there are schools all around the world that have effectively eliminated teachers from the classroom and hired what they call coaches. And so the students just plug in, the AI teaches them, and the humans in the room are not teachers, not teacher trained, don't have an understanding of cognitive development or pedagogy or social development, and they're in the room to provide this so-called support. So my advice, and I know it's hard to hear, but teachers have to be the creators. We have to keep putting the effort in. The workload and the stress of the job are not going to be solved by artificial intelligence use. We go down a road I'd rather not talk about, and that is, it's a sad look. But in terms of how we can use AI, if you want to talk about that, there are ethical ways to use artificial intelligence in the classroom. But for me, core duties revolving around creation, huge no. It's a huge no for us, for me especially.
Yeah, it's a huge no. I think the piece of it that I'm happy about is that you mentioned areas that you can ethically use it, because we on the podcast do talk a lot about expectation inflation. And because of over the years how things have shifted and changed and we're in this post COVID zone, I would suggest our jobs have become incredibly more complex and taxing. And when that happens, there's always that temptation to how can I find an efficiency? What I'm hearing loud and clear is the efficiencies that you just mentioned around the things that are most human and most important in that classroom are never to be offloaded to AI. That said, you're saying there are some things that we can use to make the job smoother, more streamlined. And I'm sure our listeners would be very happy to hear what those might be, should you choose to use them.
I really love how you frame that, because ultimately the teacher should be the final adjudicator as to whether or not they're going to use it. And so for me, the most useful manner, the most useful way to use artificial intelligence is through captioning. And so when you use a tool as simple as either Google Slides or Google Presentation or Microsoft PowerPoint or any kind of online platform like Zoom or WebEx or Google Meet, when you activate captioning, you enrich the environment for your students, especially if they're at the developmental stages of reading. And so, research has shown, and we as teachers were trained as to what happens in the brain through cognitive stages. And so we as teachers understand that decoding through visual and decoding through auditory activate different parts of the brain. And so some students who struggle with reading could benefit from captioning. So that's a simple thing. That's really easy. And if you want to take that one step further, especially for our schools that are our schools that are in areas where there's an influx of new Canadians whose language may not be English as a first language, you can use instantaneous translation. That's powered by artificial intelligence. That's still a prediction tool. And what's beautiful about that translation is that it's instantaneous, right? And I get that we as teachers depending on your district, right? You have to teach wherever you are in the world, you have to teach the language that is the first language of your region. However, when we're teaching other core subject areas, like for example, science or math, here in Canada, we teach obviously English. I don't need the student to be a master of English in order to do well in mathematics or science. I'm not evaluating English. I'm evaluating whether or not they have understood the concept I'm teaching them in science. And so let's remove English as a barrier, because English we're going to work on in other ways. Let's remove that as a barrier and let's teach and communicate the concept. So that's really powerful. And I still, like, as I go around this province, I've witnessed more and more teachers putting their hand up when I ask, is anybody using captioning in the classroom? And of course, like, ultimately, we have a saying in education here, what's necessary for some is good for all, right? And so that necessity for our new language learners or our students who are deaf or hard of hearing, this is a beautiful outreach in terms of accessibility, because we certainly know how to check boxes and talk about it, but this is a true execution of that strategy to say, I may have a student in the room who is hard of hearing, who isn't admitting it. I may have a student in the room who's having a hard time understanding by listening, but can read and decode a lot more quickly. So those are two really important uses. And those can happen in real time every day. There's nothing that can stop any teacher around the world who has access to Wi-Fi and a relatively recent and modern version of, Google or Microsoft to implement those things. But instead, we jump to these super complex tasks, which I just don't understand. Like, we need to keep things simple. We need to keep things simple, right? And so those are uses in the classroom. As a teacher, as a professional, there's nothing wrong with practicing your writing, especially in your communications with community. Like if you're doing an outreach or communicating with a parent or even your administrator, to write it to a chatbot and have it glean through your content and eliminate any spikes in a professional, like any lack of professionalism or any emotion. That's a good way to do that. not everybody is a communication specialist. It's last time I checked, not very many teachers have been trained in media and communication. And so that will fill that gap a little bit. I'm always a fan of teaching people to read and write properly and to communicate clearly, but I understand that that's not reality. And the reality is that humans are challenged by communications. So that malaise that I was talking about, that gray speech, that gray writing, it does come in handy for a teacher who wants to express themselves but not get in trouble in doing so. So those are three simple things. Like there are others, but I'm very leery of talking about all of the options because what I've learned is that there is a human tendency to go for everything that's complex before learning about things like safety and ethics. And I know it's an uphill battle, but I would prefer to hold on to the keys of the car until everybody learns how to drive just a little bit. Um, because you never know, right? Well,
Yes.
does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense. We just don't know enough yet. I do want to talk about an idea of yours that you wrote about in your article called Kids and Online Behavior, where you talk about the idea of moving from careful to responsible and teaching this to our students, but I think also just to our own children. So it really extends beyond the classroom. I know I've had many interactions, with my own children with online behavior, and I just sort of find that I instantly go to get off the screen, turn that off. You shouldn't be on that. And I switched over to what are you watching? Can we talk about what you're watching? And how does that make you feel? And what do you think about this topic? And I've had a lot more success in having conversations with them
Mhm.
about what they are watching online, what they're doing online, as opposed to me just trying to shut them down. So I think this idea that you're presenting really relates to that. So can you tell us about that?
Well, you're quoting an article that predates AI. So okay, so full disclosure, that article was written to motivate teachers to use technology in the classroom, which is crazy, right? And I'm just trying to think now, does it still hold water in the AI world? And I'm struggling to say yes, and here's why. Because we really haven't equipped our students in general or ourselves as humans with any guardrails. So we've never had this insidious force coming at us so aggressively. So let's look at the responsibility bit from a more global perspective. So school board authorities and ministries, they need to be responsible. They are the ones that have to implement some sort of safety and guardrails for everybody. Otherwise, we have no choice but to be careful. So I agree. Like the use of it in the microcosm of your own home. Yeah, I love what you just shared. It's important. And as you were sharing that with me, Chelsea, I was just thinking, are we still doing that in our house? And we are. We are. Every screen is open to the whole family, and we always question what they're watching. It requires a lot of effort.
Mm-hmm.
The responsibility piece, here's what's missing. What's missing is that nobody is talking about how to use it responsibly. That's what's missing.
Okay. Yeah.
And so people like me have no choice but to show the users how dangerous it can be. And then we slip into that careful conversation, which isn't sexy. It turns a lot of people off, right? And Alex, you referred to the whole notion of being called a Luddite. I was called a Luddite, if you could believe it. And so I recognize that it's not progressive to talk like that. And the nature of that article that you're quoting, Alex, Chelsea, was really about pushing people into progress, which is crazy.
Back it up. Back it up now, everyone. Back it
No,
up.
I still think that's extremely
That's
valid.
crazy.
Like, just for online use. I do.
Yeah,
Like, these things aren't going anywhere. They're here to
yeah.
stay. We need to learn about them. The kids need to learn about it, and they need to know how to use it responsibly.
Can I just throw this out there, though? As I'm listening to this conversation between the two of you, I'm in the conversation too. I'm thinking, and I'm always thinking. And what I'm hearing right now, Anthony, is we are in reactive. We are not ahead of the game. We are like always behind these big corporations and the commodification of education. And I know from my own research how scary all that is. And we need to move towards, as responsible adults on earth, whether we're teachers or just human beings on earth, to being proactive. And that falls upon players who create policy, who create laws. The reactive hasn't worked for us in the technology that we were using before, that I now think of as basic, even though we never have really developed the policies, in my opinion. And now is the moment. Like, we're at this tipping point where I already feel like it's gotten away from us. Big time. And so the responsibility is great. And despite the fact that it should be in the hands of the policymakers and the decision makers, we are playing that reactive game in the spaces that we're in classrooms.
You're right. You're right. We are. But a really big part of the message that I end every presentation with this, is that we are not helpless, and that those policymakers eventually are appointed or elected or selected. And when we work together, when we're all singing the same song, we can push for change. And I am beginning to see in my research that there is a growing resistance to big tech around the world, and that teachers are often at the forefront of it. So you're right. I think in every movement, reaction has to start that movement, but we have to react with a strong hand at one point, and we have to build a separate strategy to educate so that we can bring more people into that line of thinking. And then we also then need to build a strategy to provide a solution, right? I'm a solution-based person. I don't enjoy complaining. I don't enjoy stopping progress. But I think we have seen enough of how big tech works to see that there's a problem on the immediate horizon. And I'll finish by saying, Alex, I do believe we're in the right place and in the right time. I really do. I believe that if it's not a runaway train, as much as people say it, it's not doomed and it's not perfect, but I do believe that this moment in time here, the spring of 2026 till the fall of 2026, there is an opportunity here to push and make a change. I really do. I don't really have a choice, to be honest with you.
What a powerful way to end the episode. I, for one, have a lot to think about, and I am looking forward to continuing this conversation. So please be sure to join us for part 2 with Anthony. Thanks for listening to the EduWell podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a friend, subscribe, and leave a positive review. It helps others to find us.
Follow us on Instagram and Pinterest to help spread the word. Until next time, be well
and do well.